Hello, everybody. This is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and today I'm doing another video blog, this one for the astrology of the month of January. So in today's video blog, I'm going to be giving you a brief overview of all of the major transits for this month of January 2018. Now, we're already just a few days into the month. There's already been some good action. So I'll try to mention in retrospect some of the things that we've already experienced in just the past few days. I will also do a video cast of the same talk in summary, utilizing a shared screen and GoToMeeting so you can actually see all of the transits. It'll be really brief summary of this that kind of accompanies it. And that's what I'm doing for now until I figure out the kind of perfect system to live cast and be able to share screen at the same time. So at any rate, let's see. So we started off the month of January, pretty intensely. We got a full moon on the first of the year. So that, to tone the new year with a full moon is pretty powerful. And it was happening across the Cancer and Capricorn axis, which for many people often brings up family matters. You have a lot of the issues of tradition and lineage and memory and ancestry and family and the future of family. So it was a pretty, could be a pretty emotional full moon to start the year. And also the question of emotional needs versus, the responsibilities that we have. Those tensions always tend to come up with full moons under Cancer and Capricorn. I was born with the full moon in Capricorn, Sun in Cancer, so it was really like, very homey and familiar full moon for me. But at any rate, that full moon starts off our new year and could have easily highlighted the sort of Saturn moon tension in general. Responsibility, work, necessity, duty. But then on the other hand, we're all vulnerable creatures. We're all, in a sense, children on the inside. And we have needs. We have to be touched. We need affection. We're vulnerable. We need to give and receive love. And how do you balance those deeper emotional needs with the, kind of more Saturnine qualities of the of all the Capricorn energy right now? You've got like a whole bunch of planets stacked up in Capricorn at this time. Right now we have Saturn, Venus, the Sun, and Pluto all in Capricorn. So that full moon in Cancer was really sort of pulling at the Saturnine emphasis right now in the other direction. So very normal if you were feeling emotional or torn between some of those dynamics, so work and family, or duty, hard work, responsibility, and on the other hand, the more vulnerable and emotional needs that we all have. So at any rate, that's a full moon to start the year. As we progress into the month, the other thing that happens right away to start this month is Uranus is turning direct. Now, something to keep in mind whenever a planet goes from being stationed for a long time to turning direct, you have to look in your birth chart specifically at what planets Uranus will, in the case of this station, Uranus will eclipse or make aspect to during its forward movement. So usually when a planet retrogrades backward and stops, when it turns direct again, it's not only going to move direct, but it's going to move direct into new degree territory in the zodiac that it's never reached before. So this turning point you have to think of in terms of a longer process that's happening in your life right now, where when Uranus is hunkering down, stationing, it's starting to emphasize something. It's slowly starting to turn the momentum, shift the paradigm, and ask us to consider something totally new or different. Usually with Uranus, it's about progress, rebellion, innovation, change, disruption, disrupting the status quo, things like that, right? So then Uranus stations really like powering up. It's like a little ball going, vroom, vroom, it's getting like more and more intense as it's sitting there. And then when it releases, it's as though the momentum is all going to move forward now. And the specific thing that it's moving forward toward from a sort of technical standpoint are the new degrees that it has not yet covered in the zodiac. That's where the momentum of the forward movement is taking Uranus. Well, This is a big one because it's going to include the very last degrees of Aries that it has not yet touched, like roughly the late 28, 29 of the cardinal signs. So if you have anything in last 2 degrees of cardinal signs, but even more specifically, the first 2 degrees of fixed signs as it's going to enter Taurus, or really anything in Taurus in your life, or just the house topics of Taurus in your chart. So let me give you an example. In my birth chart, Uranus, as it's like powering up, and then it's going to blast forward, right? And as it blasts forward, it's going to enter Taurus, which is my first whole sign house. So it's going to move from my 12th house into my first house, which a lot of people would describe as a kind of a long period of having Uranus in the 12th and moving into the first is quite it's like do you guys remember a while back when those videos were going around where people were all dumping cold water on their heads to raise money or raise awareness about, I don't remember what it was, MS or something like that. When Uranus enters your first house, it's like a cold bucket of water over the head, and it's sort of like a big, oh my gosh, like it really can shift the paradigm for how you think about yourself, how you act and feel in the world, what kind of life direction you're taking. So it's a big one in the first house for me, but I can feel that right now, right? Because when it's powering up like that and the momentum is about to shift forward, and then I know that at the end of that momentum, what it's heading toward is contact. It's like a ball that's going to roll down the hill and crash right through the door of my first house, right? So that's what's coming for me. You can look at whatever whole sign house Taurus rules in your chart and get a feeling of what it might mean for you, and or any planets that it's going to contact for the first time in your chart at those last 2 degrees of cardinal signs. So 28 or 29, Cancer, Libra, Aries, or Capricorn. Or you can think about the first 2 degrees of the fixed signs, Taurus, Leo, Aquarius, or Scorpio. And also think about the whole sign house of Taurus in your chart, or just the house of Taurus rules if you use quadrant houses. So that's something to think about. The next thing is, let's see. Okay. Can you guys hear me? I'm getting some messages saying that some people can't hear me. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. So so the next thing here, we're going to go down the dates going forward. On January 6th, coming up, there is a Mars-Jupiter conjunction in Scorpio. So Mars-Jupiter conjunctions, I said this earlier a while back, it's sort of like Zeus on steroids. One thing that you have to remember, it really helps, for those of you who have ever seen Game of Thrones, or for those of you who have ever seen the show Vikings, if you've ever gone into those imaginative worlds of those television shows represent something a lot closer, not identical clearly, but a lot closer to what the world was like during the time that ancient astrologers were practicing astrology. These planets were literally thought of as gods. Right? They were literally thought of as representing the will or thoughts or actions of the gods. Zeus, Jupiter, was called the star of Zeus, and it was thought to be a kind of living emissary or omen of the will of Zeus in the world. Venus, this Aphrodite, the same thing. Selene, the moon. Ares, Mars. These are literal gods that they worship, and that they have the stars of these gods are thought to be like the ambassadors of their will in human affairs, and the gods overall are thought to be sort of, in different people have different ways of thinking about it, but they're thought to overall sort of represent they are like administrators of karma, right? They're administrators of the realm of coming to be and passing away, all of the stuff in the material world. For example, in India, some people who study the material world, like material scientists and people who are interested in knowledge about the material world, are sometimes called Mayavadi philosophers, which basically, you could put together the word Maya, which means illusion, or is related to things like flux and impermanence and flow, and then Vadi, which is related to the word Veda, which is sort of like science. So you have people studying astrology are people who are sometimes said to be like into Mayavadi philosophy. What that means is that they're studying the realm of Maya. All of this stuff that we're talking about, do you get the job? Don't you get the job? Do you have a love affair right now? Are you falling in love? Is your marriage breaking apart? How are your kids doing? Are you pregnant? All this stuff. And studying how it works and when it's going to happen and the sort of turning wheel of the material realm, all of that is sort of loosely referred to as sort of Mayavadi philosophy. Now, this is very important because you go back to something like trying to understand a Mars-Jupiter transit, right? And I think one of the things that can really help people is to rather than thinking about them as like psychological energies, right? Like, oh, I'm going to start feeling like really aggressive, right? Like Mars, Jupiter. The aggression, Mars, is going to become amplified Jupiter. This is so sterile and boring from my perspective, right? When I'm working with the planets in my own life and in readings and stuff like that, maybe because of all my background with ayahuasca, I experience these energies as literal gods, as demigods, or as aspects of God, the divine. So they're literal forces. They're not abstract, energies that are beaming down in like prismatic light or something like that. For me, they're like, it really helps to think of them as actual entities, even if you just do it as a kind of metaphorical exercise. When Ares and Zeus get together, you have to think about those two gods like basically coming into one another's house. So Jupiter right now is in Mars's temple, right? And Mars happens to be in his own temple right now. So Zeus and Ares are hanging out together in Ares' temple. Think about that a lot right now, and you'll start to get a feeling, and you'll start to relate to the atmosphere you're in a little bit differently. I recommend doing that for all of the transits always, because it's a much better way to sort of get the transits into your body and to relate to the archetypes of the planets in a more kind of fully embodied way. And you have to go almost think about like Game of Thrones or Vikings. In those worlds, these forces in the sky are not aspects of your mind, right? They're not aspects of your behavior. They're literal gods that are creating like circumstances in life that, you as a person are in some ways separate from, and you're going through the experiences that they're ordaining. It's just a different imaginative way of working with this stuff. So Mars Jupiter coming together is you've got a very muscular, dynamic, aggressive, emotionally cathartic kind of experience. You have to be very careful because this is the sort of astrological transit of like, confront, conquer, dominate, and do so potentially in a really emotionally manipulative way. It's about being aggressive with what you want and desire, but maybe not always stopping to ask if what you desire is a good thing or not. So you got to think about those things with Mars, Jupiter. But that energy is going to, that sort of, those qualities will increase. And you can, again, just try imagining that Mars and Jupiter are like coming closer and closer together. And as they come together, their qualities, their powers as gods are like joining forces right now in the feminine water abode of Mars. So on January 6th, we also, just in a few days, we also have Mercury trine to Uranus. This is interesting. You've got, you've got Hermes or Mercury coming into this very dynamic and fluid relationship with Uranus. Very inventive time. It's a time where it's not as difficult to say what you feel, even if it's outside of the box, or to communicate with people in unusual ways, or to dream up new or different ways of using technology, to think of a new organizational form or structure in your life, to receive messages or communications from people that are rebellious, outside of the box, inventive, exciting, enthusiastic. That's all very Mercury Uranus. So watch for that at the same time that Mars and Jupiter is coming through. You can see it's a very cavalier transit in the next few days. It's like, it's very, you if you've ever been like really like in an altered state, you're really high, you know, like think of Scrooge on Christmas morning in A Christmas Carol. He's just like running through the streets, you know, he's high on life, he wants to help everybody, right? That's kind of like Mercury Uranus in a trine with one another, but you know, add in, you know, Zeus and Mars together, and you have this kind of like this very powerful, muscular, competitive, dominating signature in the sky, and then the kind of rebellion and charisma and sort of ecstatic mental and communicative powers of Mars or Mercury and Uranus. Now on January 9th, we have that big Venus-Sun-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, which I've done videos about previously. You can look back at my other videos and check that out. I did a pretty full treatment of that already. Suffice it to say, though, on January 9th, following this series of transits with Jupiter, Mars, and Mercury, Uranus, we have a triple conjunction between Venus, Sun, and Pluto, and that's, you know, that's all about transformation of relationships, agreements, partnerships, endings and expiration dates in partnerships, women, the empowerment or disempowerment of women, all different kinds of political empowerment and deception and duplicity. Like, you be really careful about how people are in business relationships, business partnerships, friendships, different kinds of agreements, long-standing agreements, changes to agreements, firings and hirings that are very political in nature. It's a very powerful transit. And again, check out the other video I did for more on that in depth. Now, January 10th to the 13th, Mercury enters Capricorn and conjoins Saturn. Now, I wanted to highlight this again today. Play with this. Keep playing with this idea. When Mercury enters Capricorn, think about Hermes, not just some abstract psychological energy, but Hermes, a god, entering the temple of Saturn and entering the feminine earth temple of Saturn. I can't tell you what it has done for me over time to just shift the way I'm imagining and engaging with these transits. And I think it really does help. Look in your chart. Where does Capricorn rule? Do you have any planets at the first couple of degrees of Capricorn? Right now, you'd be getting a conjunction from Saturn to those planets. Mercury would also be entering that house and maybe bring the emphasis on mercurial things: technology, learning, writing, speaking, communicating, all manner of mercurial things may start to enter your Capricorn ruled house. So for example, in my own chart, I have it in the 9th house. This is on the 10th to 13th, Mercury will be in my 9th house for quite a while. I'm on January 19th, I'm leaving for India, right? So it's Mercury's entering my house of foreign travels, long distance journeys, and I'm going with a teacher of mine to India, and then I'm speaking at an astrology conference in India. So I have Hermes, Mercury, entering the ninth house of foreign travel. So literally, Hermes is like the way that I think about it now, to help me get it into my body in a different way and have a relationship with it, rather than just thinking about it about stuff going on in my head, is to think, okay, Hermes, who's a patron deity of travel, is entering the the 9th temple of long journeys and foreign places and religion, and right as I'm leaving for India. I can then I can pray to Mercury. I can hang out and talk to Mercury. I can journal to Mercury. I can have a relationship with Mercury and try to foster that, rather than just thinking, well, I'm going to be communicating in a particular way. I'm going to be with my teacher. You see, one of the things that we're always doing in astrology is we're always deadening symbols. We're always killing symbols when we interpret them. We have to interpret symbols. It's a part of astrology. But if we can keep the symbol alive by thinking of having a relationship with that symbol. And one of the ways that I've done that is to imagine that these are literal gods and demigods moving through the realms of our life, and we can hang out with them. In fact, in India, one of the things I'm really excited for is that in India, it's much the way that it was practiced 2,000 years ago. If you have a Mercury affliction, it's not that you have an unconscious shadow in your psyche that's not integrated. It's that Mercury is literally potentially fucking with you, right? And like, or that Mercury is literally administrating a certain kind of karma that's difficult. And you can say prayers, or you can do a fire yogya, or you can, I mean, there's different forms of sacrifice that you can do. There's different gemstones you can buy. There's different plants you can take in order to essentially appease and develop some satisfying reciprocal offering to Mercury, who's literally being thought of as a demigod, an administrator of karma. It's a totally different paradigm. And again, I'm pumping it today because I'm trying to, I get so many questions from people about, you know, how to think of and relate to the planets, how to navigate transit. So I'm trying to mention something today that might, you know, give you some help with it. All right, so let's see. January 10th to 13th, Mercury enters Capricorn and conjoins Saturn. It's a very good time around this time of the month. It's a very good time for solidifying agreements, making purchases, signing contracts, because you've got Mercury conjoined with Saturn in Saturn's own sign, very earthy and very practical. So whether that's a new course of study you're committing to, something you're going to write, a new form of technology, or a car you're going to buy, some kind of agreement you need to make, something you need to say that's very sober and serious and mature to somebody else. Great time for that kind of stuff with Mercury conjoined with Saturn. You also want to be careful of being overly literalistic, overly concrete, too stern, too harsh, too strict. Mentally around that time. It could be a time where you might get headaches or just feel like there's too much responsibility in your head. You know, you be careful of those things as well during that little window between the 10th and 13th. Around January 16th, we have a new moon in Capricorn with 6 planets in Capricorn total. That is crazy, right? So let's look at that. Let me bump my chart up here. So we're going to have Saturn, Mercury, Pluto, Moon, Sun, and Venus all in Capricorn for that new moon on January 16th. It's very significant because this new moon is also taking place in a very close square to Uranus, a not too distant conjunction with Pluto, and a conjunction with Venus. Pretty close sextiles with Jupiter and Mars. So like all planets are really getting in on this new moon. And it has the signature of being a Uranian new moon, which means when you get the Saturnine emphasis together with Capricorn in the new moon time, and then the square to Uranus and Aries, it's a kind of time where, you know, that lens of conservative empowerment is there again, where, you know, rebellious factions of more conservative, strict, disciplined, mature, focused, sober groups or people or ideas can become really empowered. But it's also a time where it's possible to challenge the status quo of tradition. So both are actually there. Not a lot of people, most people think of Uranus and they think of it in relationship to Saturn. You know, Saturn is structure and Uranus breaks the structure. And no, Saturn is not just structure. Saturn is also about tradition. And when Uranus is in a relationship with, you know, when Uranus is in a relationship with planets in Capricorn, it's not just about, you know, abolishing old structures. It's also about innovating and sort of rallying people around the cause of a tradition. So, for example, over the past, you know, couple of years, we've seen a massive amount of conservative empowerment in the United States. That's not something that most of us are super stoked about, but that, you know, that's just to show people that, you know, Uranus isn't just about breaking structures. Uranus is an innovator. The actual etymology of the word innovation is related to the idea of taking an existing structure, an existing tradition, and creating a variation of it. Variation is, in other words, at the heart of innovation. And Uranus is an innovator, not just a rebel and not just a paradigm breaker. So you have like the GOP right now, for example, in the United States, going through a sort of massive, for some people, you know, it looks like an identity crisis, but for a huge amount of people, it's considered an innovation upon an existing tradition. You or I wouldn't like that probably, but that's what's happening. That's Uranus playing with structure, playing with tradition, and innovating or riffing off from it. That's something that Uranus does all the time. It's not just about dismantling structure. So think about existing structures in your life and seeing them possibly innovating or sort of variations on existing structures in your life coming in on this new moon, January 16th. On January 17th, Venus will enter Aquarius. Look at the Aquarius ruled area of your chart and just note that you're going to have that nice, fresh Venetian breeze coming through in the air sign there. That's pretty simple. There's not a lot to say about that one. Just look at the house that Aquarius rules and always note when a planet is entering a new sign. Around the same time, January 17th, Jupiter and Pluto are going to be entering into a sextile with one another. That is a time of expansion and growth. Jupiter grows things. Jupiter grows the crops. Jupiter is prolific in that way. So there's a lot of growth associated with Jupiter and sort of the cosmic green light with Jupiter. But when it comes into a sextile with Pluto, it's harmonizing with the sort of Lord of the underworld. So the kind of growth that's coming about is through that depth of Pluto, which can be painful, transformative, cathartic. It can bring things up that have been hidden or repressed. So there's growth through a kind of Plutonian quality. Well, that matches very closely with what's happening on the 16th, where we have a new moon very closely conjoined with Pluto, another signature of a new beginning that's very Plutonian. So, the first month of the year really does pack a punch it's up there in probably the top 3 or 4 months of the year in terms of just the amount of powerful things going on. January 25th, Mercury will be conjoined with Pluto. That is a very, that's just a really powerful a time for the messenger Hermes to go into the underworld and bring things up. So you're going to look for dreams, synchronicities, messages, special communication, hidden or secretive communication, exposing truth, exposing lies, deception, betrayal. You're also going to think about speaking the truth that needs to be said. You're going to think about, God knows whatever's going to happen on Twitter at that time, But that's a time where disclosure, revelation, very, very powerful things that Hermes will be bringing up from the underworld with Pluto there. Then you have on the 26th of January, Mars will enter Sagittarius. So pay a special attention to pay special attention to the Sagittarius ruled section of your chart. Someone's asking me, no heat, so why the scarf? Oh, because it's like, I woke up this morning, it was like 3 degrees outside. We live in an over 100-year-old house, so we have a kind of a drafty house, so it's chilly in my house. Let's see. Okay, so there's so many other things here that I wish I could address, but I can't. I only have time to address questions about scarves. Let's see. So pay attention to the Sagittarius ruled area of your chart. When Mars enters any house, there's that, especially in a like male sort of masculine fire sign, you've got this, heat, passion, excitement, irritation, inflammation, charisma, enthusiasm. It's sort of like everything's going to amp up and get really fiery, especially in the house, in the topics of the house that it enters in your chart. I'll take time to answer some of the questions here after I'm done with all of this. Okay, let's see. Mercury on January 27th will square Uranus. That's a very powerful time for just general powerful time for, again, innovation, discovery, invention, disruption. Look for unusual or erratic communication or technology issues around that time. Be careful about buying technological stuff around that time. It's interesting to innovate, like coming up with new web content or new uses or ideas for how you can use technology or communicate with a larger audience of people. It's a great time to have quirky, fun, unexpected communication with friends. Also a time where you have to be very careful not to pop off. It was very easy to be sort of rebellious and foot and mouth syndrome with Mercury square Uranus. Just some simple things to think about. January 29th, Venus and the South Node are getting together in a conjunction. That's a big deal. wherever Venus, it'll be around the 15th degree of Aquarius. So look to the Aquarius ruled section of your chart about the 15th degree, see if it's squaring or making aspects to any planets in your chart, especially in the fixed signs. So Leo, Taurus, and Scorpio. And then, think about Venus in the South Node bringing up, there's like karmic releasing is how I would describe it. There is loss and diminishment and decline, or simplification, purging, reduction, usually related with the South Node, which is traditionally associated with Saturn and loss. But the South Node is also considered very auspicious by Indian astrologers, for example, because when we lose things materially, we tend to draw closer to spirit. A simple example of this, I have a client who, recently lost their house in a fire. And after they lost their house in the fire, one thing that they said is that despite losing their house in a fire, they'd never felt closer to spirit in their life. And that's pretty common when we lose everything in tragedy. When we're grieving, there's a lot of pain, but sometimes we can also feel tremendously closer to spirit. So, that's so something to remember, that there may be some loss, diminishment, decline, or letting go with Venus in the South Node in Aquarius around the 29th of the month. But it may not be that, a lot of the times there's no other way to think about it for me than whatever in this realm, when it's time for something to go, it's time for something to go. What am I going to do? I can grieve. That's human. I can be frustrated. That's human. At the end of the day, my spiritual practice tells me to, try to accept whatever expiration dates are there. I have to try to accept them. Finally, the month ends on a high note where we have a full total lunar eclipse, Leo Aquarius, on the 31st. So we're back into eclipse season now. The end of the month, it's like, you're rolling back right into the eclipse season. Now, lunar eclipses, like all full moons, represent culmination, fulfillment of things reaching their maximum. And from that point forward, what happens to the moon after full moon? It starts to wane. So you can think about culmination and closure, or the beginning of a process of closure in your life. Now, when you get the nodes involved, it's super karmic, right? The nodes of the moon are sort of like the moon itself, related to the wheel of karma. The wheel of karma is like you think of the moon waxing, growing brighter, and then fading, growing dimmer. You're thinking about the dualities of the world. The fastest moving planet, moving in these cycles, constantly ebbing and flowing. It's snaking up and down across the ecliptic path of the sun, and the nodes of the moon represent the intersection points of the moon with the sun's ecliptic path, sometimes referred to as the head and tail of the dragon. Rahu and Ketu in Indian astrology, both thought of as very troubling. They're both thought of as malefics, basically, in the Indian tradition. The North Node, to be very careful, because the North Node is usually about like hunger, things that you're sort of like hungry for, and the South Node is related to loss. So gain and loss are a part of the cycle of karma. I want something, I do everything I can to get it, then I have to maintain it, which usually is somewhat draining, and then eventually it expires, and then I suffer because it's gone, and then I start wanting something else, or start wanting the same thing again, and the cycle just keeps going around. For Indian astrologers, the nodes of the moon are very much just epitomizing that cycle. In modern, evolutionary astrology, we place a different emphasis on the nodes, where the North Node is thought of as what you need to do to learn and grow on a kind of evolutionary path. The South Node is thought of as something from the past, your evolutionary heritage, your karmic heritage. There's no real traditional backing for that particular use of the nodes. I don't think that doesn't mean you can't do it. You can't have innovation involved. So however you think about the nodes, it's sort of up to you. But for a full moon lunar eclipse, what you're thinking about is the houses in your chart and the topics associated with the houses of Leo and Aquarius. Let's see, what degree is this falling at? Sorry. So this one falls at, it's like about 11 degrees. 11 degrees of Aquarius and 11 degrees of Leo. So just think about that. And then think about there being a moment where there's a kind of deep releasing, a time of closure, of letting go, of things expiring. Sometimes these are subtle things, and sometimes the things that are beginning to shed their skin at the lunar eclipse are not visible or fully like recognizable for months. So remember that lunar eclipses and solar eclipses are part of a longer sort of process, but you can think of the beginning of a process of culmination and a door sort of closing in your life at the very end of the month. All right, I'll take some time to answer a few questions now that I see back here in the comments. How many years do you drink ayahuasca? Sid, hey Sid, how's it going, man? I was probably from 2000 and I'm trying to remember, it was 4 or 5 up to about 14 or 15. It was almost 10 years. Let's see. You really have to go back and study mythology. Yeah, it's a great way to, just to get in touch with the way that ancient people basically conceptualized the planets. It's very different. And remember that for them, this was not mythology. For ancient, we say that, we say, oh, you have to go back and study the mythology of Ares. Again, watch the show, The Vikings, right? These ancient people were not thinking of Ares as a metaphor, right? It was a god. It's really, really important. Now, you don't have to think it's a god. That's up to you. But I would recommend that everyone at least consider the perspective. In my own sort of adoption of Indian philosophy, I very much believe that the planets are demigods expressing or like administrators of karma. So I think that they're actual entities. And again, my only experience with that, like actually experiencing the planets as entities, is through ayahuasca ceremonies. So that's that's the basic gist of that. Let's see. Do you ever just post the moon phase anymore? I don't really. I used to do a lot of like everyday lunar posting. I don't do as much of that anymore. It's but I'm always changing. Maybe I'll come back to it at some point. Let's see. I'm relatively new to your channel and I love it so far. You really know your stuff. Thank you. I do struggle, however, with the religious parts of it, however. How do you help non-religious clients reconcile astrological mythology and faith, or the deterministic nature of the craft? That is a huge question and not easy to answer shortly. If you wanted to email me and talk about it, I could give you some good references. You can email me at nightlightastrology@gmail.com, Isabella. The short answer is just that astrology is, for me, it is an expression of religious faith. So it's, I don't think that I could, I certainly, and in the vast history of astrology has been a part of mystical and basically religious tradition. So I don't think it's easily reconciled with a kind of atheistic or worldview. I know a lot of agnostic people who embrace astrology, and I know a lot of people who embrace astrology from just a more psychological perspective, to use it as a kind of artistic or psychological language. So I think, if it resonates with you as a kind of psychological or symbolic artistic language, then that's fine. I will say that to get into the deeper metaphysics of why astrological prediction works and how it works and how astrology works to be able to predict incredibly specific things, you usually do have to kind of delve into some mystical and metaphysical territory. And it's not easy to maintain a secular materialist worldview, for example, while essentially watching astrology work. Like, for example, just 2 days ago, my father-in-law was missing his cell phone, right? So I got a message saying, hey, could you help me locate my cell phone? So I cast a horary chart and I said, check the neighbors. Sure enough, the cell phone was in the neighbor's yard. astrology can do that kind of stuff, and you know, you have to have a deeper metaphysical conversation, or you have to reconcile the metaphysics of astrology with, you know, the universe we live in. Like, there, you have to have that conversation at some point. So, but there's not just one way of talking about astrology, or why it works, or what, you know, what kind of beliefs can accompany practice of astrology. It's you know, pretty diverse in that regard. So what is, you have Saturn in Capricorn and also Jupiter. I'm not sure I understand that, so I'm just going to keep going. Hello from the Netherlands. Hello. What does Capricorn in your midheaven mean with Saturn in Capricorn? It would place an emphasis on Saturnine things in your career, achievements, recognition, authority figures who are of a Saturnine nature. It's a big time usually for career advancement, increased responsibilities in the workplace, stuff like that. What's a good way to keep up with my transits? Study astrology. Come study with us. We'll teach you how. All right. Well, that's it, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. This is something I'm going to be doing at the start of every month, a longer sort of broadcast about the astrology of the month. And oh, hey, Rebecca. Rebecca's here. Rebecca, I'm not sure if you're still here or not, but earlier when I was explaining eclipses and I said, you can think of full moon lunar eclipses like a door that's closing. That I got from my very first astrology teacher, Rebecca Gordon. That is her. I don't know if that's your metaphor, if you got that from someone else too, but that's the first time I ever heard it was from Rebecca. So, all right, guys, you guys have a great rest of your day and a happy month of January. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.